So hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lenora Callahan. I am at Roehampton University. I'm a postdoctoral researcher on the GEPIC project. And today we're having our kickoff autumn international online seminar series or seminar in our seminar series. And today we're really excited to have one of our very own in our GEPIC family, Professor Dimokritos Kavadias. We call him Demo, so you'll hear me calling him Demo. And so today, I'll give a little introduction of what GEPIC is if you're new to our seminar series, and give you an overview of how the series will run over this term and what will happen today in this seminar. And so first, the GEPIC project is a project that's run in 6 different countries. It's run in the UK, in Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Spain, and the Czech Republic or Czechia. And what we're doing is we're developing innovative and new strategies to improve girls' confidence to speak in the classroom. So we're hoping to improve girls' political voice, particularly girls that are facing multiple disadvantages, so different socioeconomic disadvantages, or if they're a part of marginalized groups. And so the idea is we have this seminar series to inform the sort of the construction and the operationalization, I should say, of our project, and to sort of have discussions with key stakeholders in the field and key experts to help inform how the project progresses. And so we've held a trial this summer, which went really well. So we're continuing it this autumn, and we have a full roster already set for this term, or for autumn term. And that's available to you. I can send that out to everyone as well. I believe everyone received the advertisement or the promotion, which had all of them listed. So please share that with anyone you think would be interested in attending. We have a lot of really great speakers that we're all really excited about. So please share them to whoever you think might be interested, any of your colleagues, or any other experts in the field you think might be interested in taking part in our discussions. And so today we have a really special introduction to our autumn series, and it's Professor Dimokritos Kavadias, who's an associate professor at the Political Science Department of the Free University of Brussels. It's VUB for short. He teaches methodological seminars as well as courses on research design, political psychology, and citizenship and participation. His research focuses on social integration and socialization. He has worked on the influence of schools and teachers on the shaping of political attitudes and knowledge of adolescence, and his main interest remains on the domain of the political effects, of socialization and schooling. Since February 2015, he's the director of the Center for Information Documentation and Research on Brussels, which is for short BRIO, at VUB, which was established in 2005 to increase knowledge about Brussels and its surrounding municipalities through scientific, interdisciplinary, and policies supporting research by initiating, developing, and distributing scientific research, as well as promoting research cooperation and information exchange. And Demo has focused BRIO on working on, in his time with BRIO, has focused on working on social integration in Brussels, on educational integration, and on urban governance in Brussels. And today, Demo will be having a discussion on definitions of political self-efficacy and open class climate. And so I'll hand it over to Demo, and after he gives a presentation, we'll have an open Q&A, an open discussion for about 30 minutes or however long it goes, and that won't be recorded. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks. You're setting the bar quite high, Lenora. So no pressure here. So welcome, everyone, and many thanks for organizing the seminar. As opposed to a classical seminar, which was fully prepared, I want to use the opportunity here to untangle my muddied or muddled thoughts about 2 central concepts in our GEPIC project. So I would like to focus on political self-efficacy and open classroom climate. Now, in the meanwhile, everyone is acquainted with the GEPIC project. I will share my screen. I made a short presentation, not too fancy, but just to keep my, I don't know if you see it now. Yes. Okay. So So I want to talk about those two concepts. Now, first of all, the rationale of the whole project is in fact based on a paper by Gemma and Brian. So it's a bit strange that I'm starting, but it's based on a finding in the sense that they looked at the gap in political self-confidence or political self-efficacy of boys and girls, but especially how it grew throughout secondary education. And they did it with the panel data from the UK, allowing to focus on the individual trajectories according to gender in successive waves of the studies. And one of the curious findings, or maybe disconcerting findings, was that there was an interaction, in fact, with the so-called open classroom climate, or the open climate for discussions in classrooms, which meant that the more students indicated that they were in a context where things were open for discussion, the bigger the gap between boys and girls. So it seems that as soon as you provide the possibility for discussion in a school context, all that space is taken in by boys during their growth or maturation in a school career. And what GEPIC wants to do is to document this process more in depth, but also develop tools to counteract this process. And so there are two key concepts here at work at the core of the project. So that's political self-efficacy and open classroom climate. So I will start with the second one, with open classroom climate, as it is seen as an important instrument to foster a democratic form of civic education. And I will try to untangle the assumptions as far as I understand them, so you can help me there to clear it out, or to provide it more sharpness or more focus when we go through it. But first, in order to understand the importance of open classroom climate, we have to go back a bit in time on discussions on political socialization and civic education of a couple of decades ago. You might remember, if you're old enough, that so political socialization, the process of acquisition of knowledge and feelings concerning political objects, was high on the research agenda of the 1960s, so late 1950s, early 1960s. And it grew during an era where there was a sort of enthusiasm on shaping environments, on shaping our society, on combating prejudice, on the emancipation of subordinated groups, Black minorities in the US, colonized people throughout the world. But in mainstream political science, and that's also noteworthy, there was not much written about countering gender disparities as such. That was problematized a bit later in gender studies by gender studies scholars. So what we had was trying to understand political culture in order to shape political structure, in order to strengthen democracy. Now, in the 70s and 80s, research into political socialization withered away. We are talking about the period of rational choice theory, about the fact that that attitudes were not seen as quite important. And at the same time, at least in Belgium, we saw at the same time that programs such as civic education were not any longer on the curriculum, meaning that in the 80s, here in some parts of Western Europe, there was not such a thing as civic education. The only thing that we should do was concentrate on teaching kids to write and to count and to read, and all would come well. So at the end of the 90s, there was a renewed interest in civic education, and there was a renewed sense of importance for schools informing citizens, informing young people into citizens. There were several reasons. In Belgium we saw, and also the rest of Europe, we saw right-wing parties that popped up. We saw a rise in distrust, in cynicism, in apathy, and civic education was seen as a way to counter that. Now, civic education is a container concept, and there were several options on how to do civic education, and there was been some controversy concerning how to do it and what the impact was of different types of programs of civic education. A track of political socialization studies stressed the importance of civic courses. It was believed that civic education as a separate subject matter in a curriculum would provide the necessary cognitive skills, the necessary bagage, you might say, to become a full-fledged citizen, while others put their money onto more informal ways of learning and more relying on the climate, the school climate, in order to have some influence. So we got this pseudo discussion between the importance of knowledge versus the importance of climate or school climate. And if we look at, it's obvious that each type of knowledge and information enriches each individual, but in many cases, civic courses might have been overrated because they rely a lot on the power of rationality and the power of reason. That was one way to look at it. So knowledge is believed to, or was believed to, lead to better understanding of the impact of policy, of politics on our own world, on our own interests. And civic courses should provide all information in order to get people, young people, to do the right thing, to behave justly. And if we try to disentangle how this reasoning was conceived, well, in fact, civic education or political classes or civic classes, they try to get some, try to influence attitudes, but they try to do it by providing information on institutions, by providing information on people, in people that are important in those institutions, by providing information on procedures that have to be followed in order to get a democratic society. And if you know something, you will get some insight, you will understand it, you will get to know why it works the way it works, and it is the way it is, and you will get some insight, and through this insight, you will develop an attitude that will try to do the good thing, to act morally on the public domain, and through your attitude, you will also consequently adapt your behavior. So you might say, it's like, I put it very bluntly here, it's like a spillover hypothesis. You have this teacup at a tea saucer, and then you have this little thing on which you put, the little plate on which you put your teacup, and then you pour knowledge into the teacup, and it will get over into the saucer, which are the attitudes, and finally in the behavior, if you pour long enough and good enough. So that's, this assumption is, it works for certain aspects, but it's incomplete. We might say it's incomplete because several studies on the interrelationship between political information and attitudes, well, they didn't find that strong relationships, and it all depends on what you're looking at. If you look at, for example, knowledge, well, knowledge, political knowledge on institutions is something that has an impact on a willingness to vote, but not necessarily on attitudes towards tolerance. So it depends on what your dependent variable is to which you look at. And it also depends on other characteristics and conditions. So knowledge was seen as one aspect, one thing to look at, but this spillover assumption, or this vision of civic education as knowledge can be contrasted with an approach in which school culture, or more precisely democratic school culture, is seen as a mean to influence the attitudes of children, to influence their values. And a complementary approach departed from a different starting point and started from the work of John Dewey. And nowadays, it was later adopted by Constance Flanagan in the 90s and 2000s. And what Dewey and Flanagan have in common is that they see schools as mini-polities. And they are, in fact, simplified contexts, controlled environments. And if we follow this line of reasoning, well, classrooms can be compared as lab experiments. You try to keep the surrounding more or less constant, and pupils get stimuli on a simplified scale model of the surrounding world. And for Dewey, education consists of that reconstruction or reorganization of experience. So education is basically experience, which adds to the meaning of experience and which increases the ability to direct the course of subsequent experiences. So education, in fact, is some sort of experience. And this educative experience can be very, very concrete, but can be also more abstract, more bookish, more formalized. And simply what you learn by books is abstract or formalized. And examples of more practical forms of political experience are the experiences of adolescents in associations, where they learn civic skills, for example, through participation in clubs, in extracurricular activities, participation with peers, in youth culture, but also participation in classroom contexts where they can contribute to the courses or to getting to know something. And Dewey was very strict in how he saw education experience. He warned his readers in his seminal work on democracy and education. It's from more than 100 years ago, in 1916. He warned for more abstract or more decontextualized forms of knowledge. He wrote that the use of written language as a medium to transmit experiences has the risk or bears the risk of being too disconnected from the experiences of children. So for Dewey, the value of knowledge was subordinate to the value of the or its use in the thinking process. And thinking becomes secondary if too much emphasis is placed on passive knowledge. Bookish knowledge is too sterile. It will not have any practical consequences. So when political education emphasizes the transmission of factual information on the working of government, on important moments of in the life of a nation, for example, the transmission or the transmitted information runs the risk of becoming passive and of bearing, consequently, no practical consequences on the attitudes or on the further experiences in the language of Dewey, on the subsequent experiences of those children that will become adults. So, to resume, the goal of education experiment, of the education experiment that is a school, is to stimulate mental and moral dispositions of children. So for democratic outlook on the world, the scale model of a school should be democratically organized and should incorporate the possibility for an open discussion in order to develop, to get the pupils let them know how the world is shaped and to provide them meaningful experiences. So they should be able to make up their mind and even disagree with the moral authority of in a classroom of teachers. So as a consequence, they should also feel themselves confident in participating in the classroom. And from this point of view, an open classroom climate is a meaningful educational experience. And an open classroom or an open climate for discussions in the classroom was introduced in the late 90s, at least in the CIVET study, and then later on in this ICCS study, through some items, 6 items. And all those items are about the student that feels free to disagree openly with the teachers about political and social issues, or that students are encouraged to make up their own minds about issues, or that teachers should respect their opinions, and students should be free to express those opinions, even if they are different from others. So these types of items, and it forms a scale. It's a scale that has been used, and it's also a scale that was quite strong. Well, it depends all in context. It was quite useful in explaining certain dependent variables, certain correlates, you might say, especially in CIVET studies and the ICCS study. So if you look at CIVET and ICCS, well, in CIVET, we see that it correlates positively with trust. So if you have all pupils that were more inclined to report an open classroom climate, had a higher degree of trust in institutions, they were more positive towards immigrant rights. They were also more positive towards women's rights. They had also higher senses of political self-efficacy, which we will see later. They had also higher degrees of civic knowledge, higher degrees of civic or social self-efficacy, and so on. So it was something that was also stimulated, and many authors put it in the forefront of something that schools should be doing, namely providing an open classroom climate for discussion. If you don't believe in traditional education, you might say, well, that's a good thing to do. But there are several things which we should consider. First of all, we saw that an open classroom climate is something that is quite, it's not necessarily something on which a school has full control. It means that it's not something that you provide for all your students and all your pupils. So we see that there are differences in the provision of open classroom climates depending on the school. There is a selection bias, you might say, according to social class, but there is also, you might say, an acceleration effect of differences between genders. And there is a gender gap in political participation, and well, open classroom climate might play their role. But there are several things that we should, especially in this project, that we should think about if we continue with the open classroom climate, which is a variable to really take into account, is the fact that all those items, they are asked at pupils, and the scale is made on the basis of the individual answers of pupils. And it's measured at the level of an individual. It's the individual perception. We don't take class averages. We are not, or in most analysis that I've seen, don't take the class or the school level as a unit of analysis, which makes it a bit tricky. I think we can discuss about that. But if you look at ICCS 2009, for example, you see that the intra-cluster correlation, or the correlation within a school in the sample is, for example, over all the ICCS countries is 17%. In Luxembourg, it's about 4%, which means that you take two pupils at random from the same school. Well, the degree that they have the same perception of open classroom climate is 4%. In Switzerland, it's 24%. It's a bit higher, but still, it's not massive, you might say. So we might ask what we are measuring here. What are we measuring here? That's a first issue. I think the same, I think, pertains to political self-efficacy. So I'm trying to problematize a bit the concepts which are quite important for political self-efficacy. Well, it's understood as an important attribute, as a link between attitudes and political behavior. It's Robert Lane that defined it quite early as an individual's levels of self-confidence in their own ability to politically engage. It's widely used in political science, and it's about how people feel. It's a sort of we call it internal political efficacy. It refers to the belief of an individual that they can act upon politics. And in the words of the political psychologist Caprara, unless people believe they can produce desired outcomes, they have little incentive to address challenging tasks, to pursue ambitious goals, and to persevere in the face of difficulties. It's something of a personal belief, and it's a notion that relates to the social learning theory of Albert Bandura, a social psychologist, former social psychologist at Princeton in the 80s and the 90s. So what is self-efficacy, and can we extend it to the domain of politics? That's a bit the question, because if Bandura talks about self-efficacy, it's about the belief that you have as a person in yourself, that what you do has an effect, and self-efficacy determines how you think, what you feel, and finally what you do. Now, if we go back to Bandura, Bandura indicated that the belief that you can do something, the feeling of being in control of a task, affects your performance. And so, for example, those that have the same skill level in mathematics, the individuals that had a higher self-estimates of their own ability scored better than those with the same level in mathematics, but with lower self-estimates. And Bandura and his team did several similar tests with physical endurance in competitive settings, and they manipulated the perceptions of self-efficacy. For example, when they were doing research in sports, well, one team was depreciated in the sense that they got skewed perceptions of their opponents. The researchers would have told them that they were outclassed by their opponents in previous competitions, that their opponents were stronger overall. So, and what they saw was always in the same direction. The higher the belief in physical effort, the more they showed physical endurance. This does not mean, according to Bandura, that random information in one direction and the other increases that self-efficacy in everyday life. It does mean that those self-efficacy beliefs have a different effect independently of skill. So skill is important, but it's something that comes apart from skill. It's the belief in your own ability, and that belief provides a sense of control, of agency, and it affects motivation, perseverance, and action. And if we look at self-efficacy, how Bandura conceptualized it, well, he says, or he provides his readers with a model in which there is a cognitive component. So self-efficacy is about thought patterns that influence our actions. And what we do is, well, Bandura assumes that our behavior is regulated by thoughts that come before, by anticipative thoughts. It calls them forethoughts. And those forethoughts are, in fact, the fact that we imagine all types of scenarios about how we see things, how they will go in the future. We visualize scenarios, and efficacy or self-efficacy influences these scenarios, these forethoughts. And these forethoughts, they empower us. They provide us with a sense or a way out of a dilemma, of a way out of action. And this empowerment is a door towards action, and in the political domain, this might be political action, but ultimately it's about the control and how we see ourselves in the cockpit of our lives. And the forethought of political self-efficacy is quite important. So it's about the feelings that we have that we can change something into our environment. And political scientists use different types of items, and for young people, well, that's not always easy because they're not seen as full-fledged citizens, and politics is not necessarily seen as something that belongs to the domain of people that are still not adults. And in ICCS, they made this, or they used this adapted scale that refers to this belief in this confidence in getting things done, knowing things about politics, and that you understand it and that you can do something with it. So these items, there are also 6 items, are about knowing more about political issues, thinking that you have something to say, or thinking of yourself that you can contribute something, that your opinions are important, and that you understand what is at stake here. It's also a good scale. It refers to certain belief and to self-confidence. And we know that it has an impact. And we know political self-efficacy has been seen as an independent variable that influences certain things. But it doesn't pertain, in my opinion, to all domains or dimensions of self-efficacy, and it doesn't necessarily relate to competences. For example, this is a graph that I made on the basis of ICCS 2009, and on the horizontal axis, I've put an average score on civic knowledge as it was measured in ICCS 2009. So I took just one of the plausible values. So it's about factual knowledge, you might say, about how politics work. And on the vertical axis, I took one of the items that comes from the political self-efficacy scale. The items that it's an average per country, that you know more about politics than others. So, and what we see is, and for example, in Finland, that the average score is on knowledge is quite high, but that it doesn't necessarily translate into thinking that you know more than others. It doesn't necessarily translate into competence. So there are building blocks that are in between, somewhere in between in the political self-efficacy. So I'm still a bit muddled up here. I don't know what we are measuring here with this political self-efficacy. Obviously, we measure confidence, self-confidence, which is important. We measure a part of the belief, but we don't measure everything, I think. I think, to sum it up or to wrap it up, empirically, we use instruments that refer to a rich theoretical tradition. We tend to be flawed in the sense that we use very reduced forms of the instruments. I think that it calls for caution in interpretation, but also for the challenge. I'm not here to say that we shouldn't use them, but that we should be careful, and also that we should think about better instruments, extending our instruments if we want to capture political self-efficacy, but also open classroom climate or democratic climate at school. That might not be the same thing as what we are now measuring. And another lesson to take away is to be careful about the leaps we make in levels of aggregation and analysis. I mean, open classroom climate is measured at the level of an individual. We ask an individual how she sees or how she perceives the discussions or the opportunities for discussions in school. Political self-efficacy refers to an individual disposition, but it pertains to a collective form of action. It's not an individual sports performance that we are measuring. We are really trying to, it's not about career choice, it's about collective action. And I assume that each form of collective action is mediated by a narrative. It's mediated by something that says that it's useful to think in this way in order to contribute to the bigger goal, to a greater goal. So that is something that is still a bit underdeveloped in theoretical reflections, and it's something that we should try to dig in, I think, with this project. And I'll stop here. So I hope that I haven't bored you out.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much, Dimo. That was great. I have some notes that I think points I want to bring up. But before we move on to the question and answer and discussion portion, I'll stop recording.